The candles on my 72nd birthday cake flickered as my daughter-in-law Victoria stood up, tapping her champagne glass with a silver spoon. The dining room fell silent. 23 family members and friends gathered around my mahogany table, waiting for her announcement. Before we sing happy birthday to Margaret, Victoria began, her voice dripping with false sweetness, James and I have some exciting news to share. My son James beamed beside her, his arm wrapped around her waist. They'd been engaged for 6 months, planning what Victoria called the wedding of the century. We've been struggling to afford our dream wedding, Victoria continued, casting a sideways glance at me. The venue, the flowers, the designer dress, it all cost so much more than we expected. But we found a solution. She paused dramatically, enjoying the attention. We're selling Margaret's house to pay for our wedding. The room erupted in applause. My sister Martha clapped enthusiastically. Oh, how generous of you, Margaret. What a wonderful wedding gift. My nephew Tom raised his glass. To Margaret, for sacrificing her home so the kids can have their perfect day. Uncle Robert nodded approvingly. That's real family love right there. You're lucky to have such a selfless mother, James. I sat there, watching 23 people celebrate the sale of my home without anyone bothering to ask if I'd agreed to it. Victoria's smug smile told me everything I needed to know. She'd already convinced everyone this was my idea. The house should sell for around $400,000, Victoria announced proudly. More than enough for our Tuscan wedding and honeymoon in Bali. More cheers. More congratulations. More praise for my generosity. I smiled and stood up slowly. If you'll excuse me, I need to make a phone call. Of course, Mom, James said, barely glancing my way. Take your time. We're just discussing wedding details. I walked to my study and closed the door, listening to the muffled sounds of celebration from the dining room. Then I picked up my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. Patricia? It's Margaret. I need you to prepare the neighborhood property portfolio for review. All 27 properties. Yes, including the ones on Maple Street where my son lives. Patricia Chen had been my property manager for 15 years, ever since I'd started quietly buying real estate in my neighborhood. What started as purchasing the house next door to prevent noisy neighbors had evolved into owning most of the residential properties within a 6-block radius. Is everything all right, Margaret? You sound stressed. Everything's about to become very interesting. Can you have all the lease agreements ready for review tomorrow morning? Particularly the rental agreement for 412 Maple Street. The house your son rents? Of course. Are you planning to make changes to his lease terms? Let's just say there might be some adjustments needed. I hung up and returned to the party, where Victoria was showing everyone photos of Italian wedding venues on her phone. Margaret, she called out as I entered. Perfect timing. I was just telling everyone about the villa where we'll have the ceremony. Isn't it gorgeous? She thrust her phone in my face, showing a sprawling Tuscan estate with cypress trees and vineyard views. Beautiful, I said calmly. How much does a venue like that cost? Only $75,000 for the weekend, Victoria said casually, as if that were pocket change. Plus another $50,000 for catering, $25,000 for flowers, $15,000 for my dress. James looked uncomfortable. Victoria, maybe we don't need to share all the details. Nonsense, she interrupted. Everyone should know how we're investing Margaret's house money. The photographer alone is $20,000, but he's shot celebrity weddings. My sister Martha gasped. $20,000 for a photographer. You only get married once, Victoria said defensively. Well, hopefully. And Margaret's house is just sitting here, gathering dust. She doesn't need all this space anyway. Where will Margaret live after you sell? Asked my friend Eleanor. Victoria waved dismissively. Oh, we'll find her a nice little senior apartment somewhere. Much more appropriate for someone her age. The casualness with which she discussed displacing me from my home of 30 years was breathtaking. Even more breathtaking was how readily everyone accepted it. What a practical solution, nodded my cousin Ruth. Margaret, you're so wise to downsize. I excused myself early, claiming fatigue. As the guests left, I heard them praising Victoria's practical thinking and my selfless sacrifice. Not one person had asked if I actually wanted to sell my house. The next morning, James and Victoria arrived at 9 a.m. sharp, armed with real estate brochures and a laptop. "Mom, we found the perfect realtor," James announced, settling onto my living room sofa. Victoria researched all the top agents in the area. Victoria spread glossy brochures across my coffee table. "Barbara Henderson sold 12 houses on this street last year. She thinks we can get $425,000, maybe more if we stage it properly. Of course, you'll need to move out during showings," James added. "Buyers don't like seeing personal belongings everywhere." I poured myself coffee and sat in my favorite armchair. "That's interesting. Before we call any realtors, there's something I need to show you both." I opened the manila folder Patricia had delivered an hour earlier and spread its contents across the coffee table, pushing aside Victoria's real estate brochures. "What's all this?" Victoria asked, picking up a document. "Property deeds," I said simply. James leaned forward, squinting at the papers. "Mom, why do you have property deeds? Are these for your house?" "Some of them. This one's for my house, yes. But this one." I handed him another document. "This one's for your house." The color drained from James's face as he read the deed. This says you own 412 Maple Street." "I do." Victoria snatched the paper from his hands. "That's impossible. We rent from Westfield Property Management." "Westfield Property Management is my company. Has been for 15 years. I handed them more documents. "This deed is for the Johnson house next door to you. This one's for the Martinez family across the street. This one's for the young couple with the new baby 3 houses down." Victoria was frantically shuffling through papers now, her face growing paler with each deed. "You own all these houses. 27 properties in total. The entire development where you live, plus most of the surrounding blocks." James was staring at a rental agreement with his signature on it. "I've been paying rent to you? For 3 years. Through Westfield Property Management, yes. You've been an excellent tenant. Always on time with payments, keep the yard neat, no complaints from neighbors." Victoria's voice was barely a whisper. How much are all these properties worth?" I pulled out Patricia's market analysis. Current estimated value is approximately $8.7 million. The rental income provides about $45,000 monthly. The room fell dead silent. Victoria was doing math in her head, her $200,000 wedding budget suddenly seeming very small compared to my actual net worth. "Mom," James said slowly, "why didn't you ever tell us you owned real estate? You never asked. You assumed I was living on Social Security and your father's pension. I let you believe that because it seemed to make you feel better about yourselves." Victoria was still staring at the property deeds. But you live so simply. You drive that old Honda, you shop at discount stores." "I live within my means. The rental income gets reinvested into more properties or saved for real emergencies. Not Italian weddings. Real emergencies." James echoed. "Medical bills. Natural disasters. Actual hardships. Not wanting to impress people with an overpriced party." Victoria's hands were shaking now. "So when we announced we were selling your house, you announced you were selling a house worth $425,000 to pay for a wedding, while sitting in a dining room owned by someone worth nearly $9 million who you planned to put in a senior apartment." The implications were sinking in. James looked sick. "Mom, we had no idea. We thought you were struggling financially. You thought I was poor, so you decided to sell my house without asking me. And when I'm actually wealthy, you're upset that I didn't share that information with people who just tried to steal my home." Victoria stood up abruptly. "We need to cancel the wedding planning. The deposits, the venue, everything. We can't afford any of this." "Why would you cancel? You had no problem spending my money when you thought I only had one asset. Now that you know I have many, suddenly you're concerned about costs." "That's different. We didn't know you were rich. So it's only acceptable to steal from poor people." James was reading through rental agreements for other properties. "Mom, the Hendersons have been trying to buy their house from you for 2 years. Why won't you sell to them?" "Because they've been model tenants for 8 years. Selling would displace them in a market where they can't afford to buy anything else. Unlike some people, I don't believe in prioritizing profit over people's homes. The irony wasn't lost on them. I'd refused to sell to families who actually lived in the properties, but they'd assumed I'd happily sell my own home to fund their party. Victoria was crying now. Margaret, I'm so sorry. We had no idea. We thought we were helping you downsize, making practical decisions. You thought you were taking my house to pay for your wedding. The only difference now is that you've learned I have other houses too. James stood up, pacing my living room. What happens now? Do you want us to move out? Are you going to evict us? That depends. Are you still planning to sell my house to pay for your wedding? No. Of course not. We'll figure something else out. A smaller wedding, maybe at the community center. Or, I said calmly, you could have the wedding you want and learn to ask for help instead of taking what you think you're entitled to. They both stared at me. I'd be happy to help pay for a reasonable wedding. Not a $200,000 spectacle in Italy, but something beautiful and meaningful here. If you'd asked instead of announced. Victoria collapsed back onto the sofa. You mean, you would have helped us all along? I've helped dozens of families over the years. I paid for the Martinez family's medical bills when their daughter had leukemia. I covered 3 months of rent for the Johnsons when Mr. Johnson lost his job. I funded college scholarships for neighborhood kids. But you never offered to help us, James said quietly. You never asked. You just took. There's a difference between helping someone who's struggling and enabling someone who feels entitled to your assets. 6 months later, James and Victoria had a beautiful wedding at the Botanical Gardens. I contributed $15,000 toward a celebration that was elegant, meaningful, and actually about their love rather than impressing strangers. They live in the same rental house, but now they understand that home ownership is a privilege, not a right. More importantly, they learned that assuming someone is poor doesn't give you permission to spend their money, and discovering someone is wealthy doesn't automatically make you entitled to their wealth. Some lessons are worth more than any inheritance.